Shortly after high school, some friends and I went camping one weekend. We drove to a national park, which had a campground, but we decided to camp outside the ground so we didn't have to worry about making too much noise and disturbing other campers. We set everything up in a nice clearing next to a bushy slope, get a fire going, the moon comes out, and we crack open some beers. So far, so good. Around 10 p.m., we suddenly hear the sound of people walking downhill through the bush towards our camp. This puts us on guard, but we weren't too concerned because it's a popular park and we figured it's just more campers making the most of the long weekend. We all keep our eyes trained towards the sounds, and soon enough, the people arrive at the bottom of the slope. But they didn't cross the tree line into the clearing. They just stop in a huddle, and it's hard to make out the details, but it looks like there's about 6 figures. Somewhat oddly, all of them are dressed in white, and the moonlight reflecting off of the garments gives them an eerie glow. I can sense my friends are starting to feel nervous as I am. My friend D tries to ease the tension and calls out to the group in a friendly way, "Hey, how's it going?" They don't reply. D keeps calling out to them, stuff like, "We're just enjoying some beers here. It's a beautiful night. What are you up to?" They don't reply. Eventually, one of the figures emerges from the tree line and walks towards us. He stops just beyond the light from our fire and stands there, staring down at us. D babbles at him for a few seconds with some more nervous banter, but the man cuts D off mid-sentence. "How long will you be here for?" he asks. Really low and slow, so we can't make out an accent or a tone, but he certainly doesn't sound friendly. We were originally going to camp for 2 nights, but I have a bad feeling now for obvious reasons. And I blurt out, "Oh, we're not going to be hanging around. We leave first thing tomorrow morning." My friends murmur agreement, and the guy says nothing, but just keeps staring down at us. I notice his clothes in more detail now. As I mentioned, they were all white, and at the top was a kind of like a loose plain baseball jersey, only made of thin cotton material. This is odd, because the night is fairly cool enough that I can see the man's breath, and he should be freezing, but whatever. He just keeps staring, and I can hear the other people from his group shuffling in their spot behind the tree line. Finally, the man speaks again. "You're leaving tomorrow morning." It's not a question. We all agree, panicky now. Yeah, we're leaving tomorrow morning." Apparently satisfied, the man turns away and walks back to his group. They start making their way back up to the slope. My friends and I say very little until we can hear that the group is gone. And even when they're totally out of our earshot, we speak in nervous whispers. What the fuck was that all about? Some weird people. We try to chill out, get some music going and crack more beers, but we're shaken up now, and we can feel like we're being watched. We think the group must have parked up the slope somewhere, scoping us out. So much for a fun night of drinking and bullshitting. We're too wound up, and we end up crawling into the tents. We were spending the night bunkered down like some mice hiding from a cat. We get up early and leave immediately. The whole time we're trekking back to the car park, we feel like we're being trailed. The sensation of being watched never leaves us. Once we're loaded into the car and onto the road, we finally relax. Man, that was freaky shit last night. We go over it all, kind of excited in a weird way, considering the different theories, meth heads, occult, Satanists. But would Satanists dress in all white? It's almost amusing now that we were out of any danger. We stop at the town's nearest park. It's a real bumfuck nowhere kind of place, just a petrol station and a dingy looking pub, a closed down bank, and other retail decay. We pull up into the petrol station for snacks, and the guy manning the counter looks like a hard ass, but we chat a bit and he's friendly enough. We were telling him about running into the weird people last night at the park, and he's very interested in that. He makes us explain in detail what happened. After he's heard our story, I expect him to laugh it off. Oh, they were just some religious weirdos that camp out there sometimes. But he doesn't laugh. He gets all quiet and narrows his eyes. "You kids were lucky last night," he says. And that right there is the scariest part of the story, because he is a no bullshit cowboy type, and I can clearly tell he's being dead serious. We pay for our snacks and drive back to the city, never to return. I've told this story a few times, and others often come up with kooky explanations, that those weird people were ghosts, or alien hybrids, or abnormal spirits or something. This wasn't that, though. They were real flesh and blood people that we saw. There was nothing paranormal about it. I once came across a similar story on this forum. It happened in the US, but it was almost exactly the same experience. My story takes place in my home country, where people are more likely to believe in the paranormal. I was around 18 when it happened. I was at home. It was late at night, around 11 p.m. I got into a fight with my boyfriend, as teens tend to do, and naturally, it got overdramatic. There was yelling on phones and tearful conversations. When I put the phone down, I got an idea in my head. It's the stupidest thing I've ever done. I decided to walk to his house and confront him face to face. He and I only live 15 minutes apart, if you walk. However, we're separated by roads that are very dimly lit. If you drive past, you'll never see anyone on the sidewalk. People just don't walk there at night because it's dark as hell. We basically live in a part of town consisting of gated communities, and I was going to walk from mine to his. So I put on a sweater, some shorts and sneakers. My appearance plays a big part in this, because I have a very stereotypical Asian doll look. Bangs, long straight dark hair, and rather pale skin. I'm a short girl, only about 5 feet tall. Until now, I could look 12 if I really wanted to. Basically, I'm the last person in the world who would look threatening, and that's not good for me. But that night, I was angry. Deep down, I knew walking there was dangerous, but I wouldn't listen to the alarm bells in my brain. I set off, walking at a brisk pace. It was dark, and there was no one on the streets. I was completely alone and very pissed. So pissed that I suddenly got a nosebleed. Already, I'd been tearing up from the drama. I get nosebleeds when I'm stressed. So out of nowhere, blood gushed from my nose and splattered all over my clothes. It was like a running faucet. I wiped it with my hands a little bit, so my hands got bloody too. My face was tear-streaked and blood-stained. I looked like a mess. Nevertheless, I was too pissed to stop or turn back or even care. I kept walking, even more pissed now that my clothes were ruined. In my head, I looked like an idiot, and then I saw them. I froze. I just crossed the street. The sidewalk had a wall to the left, because there was another gated community to the right. I saw figures moving, around 4 or 5 of them. They looked like men. It was so dark I couldn't see their faces, but there was a ladder leaning against the wall. One of them was on it. They'd been talking, and I could see the glint of tools hanging from their belts. Saw and hammer. At first, I thought that they were repairmen, since it's normal around here for public repairs to be done late at night, so that it doesn't get in people's way in the morning. But still, like any girl, I went from angry to terrified. A gang of men in a secluded area never bodes well for any person. I was going to turn around and flee in another direction, but it was too late. Before I could leave unnoticed, they'd seen me, because they turned their heads towards me at the same time. For a very brief moment, we all just stared at each other. It went by so fast that I didn't even have the chance to look scared. My expression was still blank. Just when I was about to flee, one of them yelled, and I was caught in my tracks. But it wasn't an angry yell, it was a high-pitched trembling. The rest of the men started cursing, and they scrambled. I was shaken. I thought they were going to run for me, but they actually were scared shitless. I realized this when they all ran for their car, parked right beside the sidewalk, and they left their lantern behind. They were still cursing, telling each other to hurry up as the car did the fastest, most impressive U-turn I've ever seen in my entire life, and they drove off in the direction. I realized that looking like a bloody China doll, they must have thought I was a ghost. I almost started laughing then and there because I was too freaked out by that experience. I hightailed it to my boyfriend's house. Only around a week later did I find out in the papers that there had been a string of robberies around that area. The robbers would bring a ladder, lean it against the wall, and use it to get into the houses that were located on the very border of that subdivision. Police actually found out their plans because they found a ladder that had been left behind, aka what happened during my night. One recent robbery had led to a maid being killed by the thieves. Until now, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't got that nosebleed. This happened back when I had just turned 17, only a few months ago. I was at home with my mother and sister, who I lived with at the time, both of them sleeping and leaving me to deal with my boredom by myself. The house we were living in at the time was tiny as hell and only had 2 bedrooms, and it was all on one floor, but luckily for us, it was a really wooded area that we lived in, and it was super difficult just to find. It didn't face any streets and had 3 turns on a driveway strip just to find where it was. People got lost going to it until we had to get them on the phone and describe where it was to them. No way would anyone just stumble across it. You have to actually search for a home. So it was only about 1 in the morning, and I was messing around on the computer and watching TV, procrastinating from sleeping. There was no good reason for me to just go to bed yet, but I was relaxed and totally chill with staying up for a few more hours, since my mom had just gone to bed about an hour before. I hadn't begun to lock up the house for the night, and all of our windows were still open, and most importantly, our living room window. Let me get this straight. We had a bay window, and I hated it. This window was freaking huge, probably about 8 feet long and 6 feet tall. It even has smaller windows on the sides of it, so you can open those and get a good breeze. It takes up most of the wall, and during the day, it's great. We could look outside our window, and we were surrounded by trees and the sunlight in our lawn. But at nighttime, when you look out, all you can see is darkness. Not good for a paranoid teenager. I was sitting on the couch, which is right next to the window, when I heard something outside start shifting and dragging. We had wild animals roam across our lawns all the time, and especially at nighttime. So I wasn't too worried, but after about 5 minutes of this continual noise, I began to get a little worried. I tried to glance out, but all I could see was darkness. Listening closer, I froze. The sound was footsteps. There was someone outside. For a moment, I just sat there, not sure what to do. Sometimes, my older brother, who worked about 5 minutes away from our house, would stop by when he got off early in the mornings. But this seemed different. I felt really vulnerable. The feeling of being watched was really heavy and made my blood run freezing cold. Sliding off of my couch, I walked over to my front door, which wasn't even locked. Seeing as it was such a small place, the front door led directly into our living room and was less than 6 feet of wall space away from those huge windows. As quietly as I could, I locked the door and turned on the porch light, hoping that I was just wrong and I'd see an animal scamper away. I was dead wrong. The moment I turned the porch light on, I could glance over and see that our porch light had lit up the front lawn, revealing the silhouette of an adult man standing directly in front of my front door. I've never been so terrified in my entire life, so the first thing I did was sprint back to the kitchen, watching the front door and window carefully and grabbing the absolute biggest knife I could find, which was longer than my forearm. I continued to keep my eyes looking out as I walked sideways, making my way to where my mom and sister were sleeping. I looked away for a split second to get the door unlocked to their room, and when I looked back, I nearly started crying. The guy was older, probably over 40, dressed completely in black, and had his face pressed up against my window. We made eye contact and kept it, and then my brain just didn't seem to be working. This guy had been pacing back and forth in front of my house for at least 5 minutes, and now was just looking at me. If he'd wanted, he could have hit out my screen and gotten in. Panicking, I grabbed the door handle and threw the door open as hard as I could, turning and sprinting into the room. I'd woken up my mom when I'd slammed the door open, but she really didn't register what the danger was until she saw the man waving a knife around and yelling. By the time she came out of the living room, he was gone. We called the police, and before they got there, I had enough time to deal with my panic attack and set the knife down away from me. They checked out the area, and the guy wasn't anywhere in sight, but apparently there was a long divot in the ground out in our lawn from where he was pacing back and forth. Right in front of those windows, it wasn't too far out, but if I'd looked out at any time, he could have seen me, and I never saw him. That thought still freaks me out to this day. They haven't had any more cases of him window peeking since, but I have no idea what he would have done if he'd actually gotten into my house. Still, my mom's first course of action was to go out and get mace, in case any more incidents like this happen again. Point being, from this point on, windows and doors get shut and locked the moment the sun goes down, with no exceptions.